Ida for not telling my sister that her friends referred to her as her fiancé as charity case? I come from a working-class family, a background where life was shaped by long hours and hard-earned paychecks. My parents, though loving and supportive, could only offer us so much in terms of opportunity. It wasn't their fault, it was just the way things were. Growing up, we didn't have the luxuries that others took for granted. Family vacations were unheard of, new clothes came only when absolutely necessary, and the idea of extracurricular activities or private lessons was as far-fetched as winning the lottery. Our lives were built on frugality, resilience, and the hope that one day, through hard work or sheer luck, we might break free from the cycle of modest living. In this landscape of limitations, my sister stood out like a beacon of potential. Even as a child, she possessed a quiet determination and a sharp mind that seemed destined for greater things. She excelled in school, earning praise from teachers who could see she was cut from a different cloth. My parents were proud of both of us, of course, but it was clear that my sister had the kind of spark that could carry her far beyond the life we knew. When she won a scholarship to a prestigious private school, it felt like a small miracle, a golden ticket that could catapult her into a world we had only seen in movies or read about in books. The private school was a universe apart from the one we had grown up in. Its sprawling campus, with its manicured lawns and stately buildings, seemed almost surreal. The students there were polished, confident, and, above all, wealthy. They lived in a world of privilege that my sister and I had only glimpsed from the outside. But while I felt intimidated by it, my sister saw it as a challenge, an opportunity to prove she belonged. At first, it wasn't easy for her. She was an outsider, a scholarship kid in a sea of designer clothes and expensive cars. She worked hard to fit in, but it was clear she felt the weight of being different. She would come home with stories about school events she couldn't attend because we couldn't afford the fees or the outfits. I could see it in her eyes, the silent longing to be a part of something bigger, something brighter than the life we had always known. Then, everything changed when she met him. Her fiancé, though he was just a boy back then, was the kind of person who seemed to glide effortlessly through life. He came from a family of wealth and influence, the kind of family that could make things happen with a phone call. He was charismatic and self-assured in a way that only someone who had never known struggle could be. They started dating when they were 15, and from that moment, my sister's life began to transform. Being with him opened doors that had previously been closed to her. She was no longer the girl on the fringes, the scholarship student who couldn't afford to go to the winter formal. With his support and the acceptance of his family, she became someone who belonged. His family, to their credit, welcomed her with open arms. They were generous in ways that were almost overwhelming. They made sure she had everything she needed to thrive: clothes for school events, invitations to exclusive gatherings, even opportunities to travel with them on luxurious vacations. It wasn't just about material things, though. They gave her a sense of belonging, a feeling that she was valued and cared for in a way that went beyond her role as their son's girlfriend. For the first time, my sister didn't have to sit on the sidelines and watch others live the kind of life she had always dreamed of. She was living it herself, and she flourished. I watched from the sidelines as her life became a whirlwind of opportunity and privilege. Part of me was happy for her; she deserved every bit of the happiness she had found. But another part of me couldn't help feeling a little envious, a little left behind. While she was attending lavish parties and jetting off to exotic destinations, I was still here, in the world we had both come from, working hard and making do with what we had. I didn't resent her for it, though. If anything, I admired her ability to adapt to a world so different from ours, to seize the opportunities she had been given and make the most of them. As the years went by, my sister's relationship with her fiancé deepened. They became inseparable, their lives intertwined in ways that seemed almost fairy tale-like. His friends became her friends, and his family became her second family. She had built a life that was so far removed from the one we had grown up in that it was almost hard to recognize her sometimes. But beneath the designer clothes and polished exterior, she was still my sister, the same girl who used to share a bunk bed with me, who cried when her goldfish died, who laughed so hard she couldn't breathe at our silly inside jokes. I never doubted that she loved him. It was written all over her face, in the way she talked about him, in the way she looked at him when she thought no one was watching. He had given her a life she could only have dreamed of, and she was grateful for it. She worked hard to fit into his world, to be the kind of person who could stand beside him as an equal. And for the most part, she succeeded. But despite everything, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking a tightrope, balancing precariously between two worlds. She had one foot firmly planted in the life of privilege she had built with him, but the other was still rooted in the working-class upbringing that had shaped her. It was a delicate balance, one that required constant effort and vigilance. I worried for her sometimes, worried that one misstep could send her tumbling back into the life she had worked so hard to escape. And then there was the situation, the thing that threatened to unravel everything she had built, everything she had worked so hard for. It wasn't something I could have foreseen, and even now, I struggle to make sense of it. All I know is that my sister's charmed life, the life she had fought so hard to create, now hangs in the balance. And I can only hope that she finds a way to navigate this storm without losing herself in the process. As my sister's relationship with her fiancé deepened, I saw the transformation in her life become even more pronounced. By the time they were both in college, she was thriving in a way I hadn't seen before. She had fully embraced the world of privilege she had entered, and she was flourishing academically and socially. To an outsider, it would have been easy to assume that she had always belonged in that world, that she was as polished and self-assured as the people she surrounded herself with. But for me, as someone who knew her better than anyone, I could still see the cracks beneath the surface. Even with all her successes, I could tell that she still carried a certain insecurity, a quiet fear that she might not truly belong. It wasn't something she said out loud, but it was there in the way she worked harder than everyone else to prove herself, in the way she overthought every interaction and second-guessed her place in the lives of the people around her. And it was there in the way she clung to her fiancé like a lifeline, as if being with him was the key to keeping everything she had built from falling apart. When they were around 19, something happened that has stayed with me ever since. It was during a family dinner at their home, a grand, intimidating house filled with elegant furniture and expensive artwork. I always felt out of place there, but my sister seemed to glide through it all effortlessly, as if she had been born into it. Her fiancé's friends were over that evening, a group of young men and women who exuded confidence and privilege in equal measure. They laughed loudly, shared inside jokes, and seemed completely at ease in their environment. I remember watching them from the sidelines, feeling like an observer in a world I didn't understand. At one point, I found myself in the kitchen, pouring myself a drink to calm my nerves. That's when I overheard them. A few of his friends were standing nearby, their voices low but clear enough for me to catch every word. They were joking about my sister, laughing about how she was his charity case. They made remarks about how lucky she was to have been rescued from her life and how her relationship with him was the best thing that ever happened to her. Their laughter was light-hearted, almost playful, but there was a cruelty underlying it that made my stomach turn. And then there was him. Her fiancé was there, too, standing among them with a drink in hand. When one of his friends made an especially cutting remark, he told them to shut up, but there was no real conviction in his voice. It was a half-hearted rebuke, the kind you give when you don't actually mind what's being said. Worse than that, I noticed the faintest hint of a smirk on his face, as if he found the whole thing amusing. That look, the smug, almost self-satisfied expression stayed with me long after the moment had passed. I was frozen in place, unsure of what to do. My first instinct was to storm into the room and confront them, to demand that they stop speaking about my sister that way. But then I thought about her, about how happy she seemed, about how much she loved him. She had worked so hard to fit into this world, to build a life for herself that was so far removed from where we had come from. I didn't want to be the one to tear it all down. So I said nothing. I kept what I had heard to myself, convincing myself that it wasn't worth the risk of upsetting her. Maybe they were just being immature. Maybe it was just a stupid joke that didn't mean anything. After all, he had told them to stop, even if it wasn't with much conviction. And my sister seemed so happy. What good would it do to tell her and make her question everything? But even as I rationalized my silence, a part of me felt like I had betrayed her. I hated myself for standing by and doing nothing, for letting those words go unchallenged. I avoided looking at her fiancé for the rest of the evening, unable to shake the image of that smirk from my mind. Years passed, and I buried the memory deep inside me. My sister and her fiancé's relationship continued to grow stronger, and they became the kind of couple that others envied. They were beautiful together, successful in their respective careers, and seemingly perfect in every way. Their engagement came as no surprise. It was the natural next step in their fairytale romance. My sister was overjoyed, and I tried to focus on her happiness, even as that old memory lingered in the back of my mind like a shadow. It wasn't until recently, after their engagement, that everything came to the surface. One of her friends, someone she had grown close to over the years, confided in her about something that had been eating away at them. They admitted that the charity case jokes had been a running theme among her fiancé's friends for a long time. They had started when they were teenagers, back when my sister was still finding her footing in their world, but they had persisted over the years, even as she had proven herself time and time again. Her friend insisted that her fiancé had always defended her, that he had never participated in the jokes himself and had even confronted their friends about it on multiple occasions. But the damage was done. The knowledge that those jokes had been made at all, especially for so long, cut my sister deeply. She felt humiliated, betrayed by the people she had thought of as her friends, by the world she had worked so hard to belong to. When she told me about it, I could see the pain in her eyes. She was trying to hold it together, to rationalize it and convince herself that it didn't matter, but I knew her well enough to see through the facade. She was devastated. And in my attempt to comfort her, I made things worse. I let it slip that I had overheard those jokes years ago, back when they were 19. I told her about that evening in the kitchen, about what I had heard and what I had seen. When my sister confronted me about the jokes, I could see the storm brewing behind her eyes, a mix of betrayal and disbelief. It wasn't just the knowledge of what their friends had said, it was the fact that I had kept it from her, that I had chosen silence over honesty. For someone like my sister, who had clawed her way into a world she was never meant to inhabit, the idea that her place there might have always been seen as a favor, as charity, was devastating. And now, my role in all of it was under scrutiny. I tried to explain myself, but every word I spoke felt like it was making things worse. I told her that I didn't think the jokes were malicious, that they were just dumb remarks made by teenagers who didn't know any better. I told her that her fiancé had at least tried to shut them down, even if it wasn't in the strongest way. And I told her the truth, that back then, I thought I was protecting her, that I didn't want to disrupt her happiness or make her question a relationship that seemed to mean the world to her. But none of it mattered. To her, it was as if I had sided with them, as if I had validated their cruelty by staying silent. She was furious, not just at them but at me, for not being the person she could count on when it mattered most. And the more I tried to defend myself, the more I realized that I might never be able to undo the damage I had done by keeping quiet. The truth was, she had been head over heels in love with him back then, the kind of love that makes you blind to anything else. I'd seen it in the way she lit up when he walked into a room, the way she would defend him against even the mildest criticisms, the way she had thrown herself into his world without hesitation. At the time, I didn't think she would have believed me if I had told her what I'd overheard. Or worse, I feared that she might believe me but brush it off, choosing him over her own self-respect. And if that had happened, I would have been the villain, the one who tried to tear them apart for no reason. Even now, as she wrestled with the betrayal, I could see that her love for him hadn't wavered. She was angry, yes, but she wasn't ready to walk away from him. She had spent years building a life with him, a life that had elevated her in ways she could never have imagined. She wasn't about to throw it all away over a few stupid jokes made by people she didn't even like that much. But the damage wasn't just about the jokes, it was about the deeper implications, the unspoken hierarchy that had always existed between her and his friends, between her and him. She had always felt like she needed to prove herself, to justify her place in their world, and now she was questioning whether she had ever truly belonged at all. I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt as I watched her grapple with these feelings. She had worked so hard to build a life for herself, to rise above the circumstances we were born into, and now it felt like it was all crashing down around her. And though I had tried to shield her from the pain back then, I was beginning to wonder if my silence had done more harm than good. In the days that followed, the tension between us lingered. She kept her distance, retreating into herself as she tried to process everything. I could see the cracks in her facade, the way her confidence seemed to waver, the way she second-guessed even the smallest decisions. She stopped mentioning her wedding plans, and the excitement that had once radiated from her seemed to fade. It was as if the revelation had tainted everything, casting a shadow over the life she had built. Her relationship with her fiancé was strained as well. Though she hadn't told me much, I could sense that there were unresolved issues between them. She had confronted him about the jokes, and while he had reassured her that he had always defended her and never condoned the behavior, it wasn't enough to erase the hurt. She couldn't shake the feeling that he had allowed it to continue for far too long, that he hadn't done enough to protect her from the ridicule of his friends. And though she wasn't ready to end things with him, the trust between them had been fractured. As for me, I felt like I was walking on eggshells around her. I wanted to make things right, but I didn't know how. Every time I tried to bring up the subject, she would shut me down, clearly not ready to forgive me for my role in all of this. And so, I kept my distance, hoping that time would heal the wounds I had inadvertently caused. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about the jokes or even my decision to stay silent. It was about something deeper, something that had always been there but had never been spoken aloud. My sister's entire life had been a balancing act, a constant effort to prove herself in a world that didn't always welcome her with open arms. And now, the foundation she had built her life on was crumbling, leaving her to question everything she thought she knew about herself, about her fiancé, and about the people she had surrounded herself with. She started pulling away from his friends, distancing herself from the people who had once been such a central part of her life. She stopped attending their gatherings, claiming she was too busy with work or wedding planning, but I knew the real reason. She couldn't bear to be around them, to see their faces and wonder if they were still laughing behind her back. She began to rely more on her own friends, the ones she had made through her career and her own efforts, people who had no connection to her fiancé or his world. It was as if she was trying to reclaim a part of herself, to build an identity that wasn't tied to him or the life he had given her. But even as she tried to move forward, the cracks in her relationship with him grew wider. She began questioning things she had never questioned before, examining their relationship through a new lens. She wondered if he had ever truly seen her as his equal or if he had always viewed her as someone who needed his help, his protection. She started noticing little things, comments he made or decisions he took without consulting her, that seemed to reinforce the imbalance between them. And though she still loved him, she couldn't shake the feeling that their relationship had been built on an uneven foundation from the very beginning. In her heart, she wanted to believe that their love was strong enough to overcome this, that they could rebuild the trust that had been broken. But the doubts lingered, gnawing at her like a persistent ache. She wasn't sure if she could ever truly forgive him for his complicity, for allowing his friends to make her the punchline of their jokes for so many years. And she wasn't sure if she could forgive herself for not seeing it sooner, for investing so much of her life in a relationship that might never have been as perfect as she thought it was. As for me, I could only watch from the sidelines, helpless to fix the damage that had been done. I had always wanted the best for my sister, and I had believed that her relationship with him was a part of that. But now, I wasn't so sure. I wanted to tell her that she deserved better, that she didn't need him or his world to be happy. But I knew that it wasn't my place to say. This was her life, her choice, and all I could do was support her as she tried to find her way forward. In the weeks that followed, the tension seemed to settle, but it left behind an undeniable weight, something that neither my sister nor her fiancé could ignore. She stayed in the relationship, holding on to the love that had grown between them over the years, but the reality of what she had learned created cracks in the foundation they had built. The apology from his friends was sincere, or so they claimed, but it didn't erase the years of ridicule, nor did it undo the damage it had caused to her sense of belonging. She accepted their apologies, not because she forgave them entirely, but because she was exhausted. Confronting them had drained her, and she no longer had the energy to fight. Her fiancé, to his credit, seemed determined to make things right. He went out of his way to assure her that the jokes had never been something he encouraged, that he had always seen her as his equal. He admitted to mishandling the situation when they were younger, acknowledging that his half-hearted attempts to stop the jokes had not been enough. He told her that he had always loved her for who she was, not for what she represented or what she had achieved. He promised her that the past didn't define their future and that he would never allow her to feel inferior again. My sister wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that his love for her was genuine, that it had never been tainted by the condescension of those around him. But trust is fragile, and hers had been deeply shaken. She began to question the dynamics of their relationship in ways she never had before. She wondered whether he had always been aware of the jokes and had simply chosen not to tell her. She wondered if he had ever truly understood the sacrifices she had made to fit into his world. And, most painfully, she wondered if there was a part of him that had, even subconsciously, enjoyed the idea of being her savior. To an outsider, everything seemed fine. The wedding plans continued, albeit at a slower pace, and she carried on with her life as if nothing had changed. But to those who knew her well, it was clear that something was different. She no longer spoke about the wedding with the same excitement she once had. Her laughter, once so effortless, now felt restrained, as if she were holding something back. Even her relationship with me, which had always been unshakable, had become strained. She wasn't angry with me anymore, but there was a distance between us that hadn't been there before, a distance born of disappointment and the lingering pain of my silence. As the months went on, I began to see a change in her. Slowly but surely, she started to reclaim her sense of self. She threw herself into her work, taking on new projects and challenges that allowed her to shine on her own terms. She reconnected with old friends, people who had known her before she became part of her fiancé's world, and found solace in their unwavering support. She even started therapy, something she had resisted for years, and began unpacking the insecurities and doubts that had plagued her for so long. Through it all, her fiancé stood by her, doing his best to support her as she worked through her feelings. But even as she rebuilt herself, the question of their relationship loomed large. She loved him, that much was clear. Despite everything, she couldn't imagine her life without him. But love alone wasn't enough to erase the doubts that lingered in her mind. She wondered if staying with him meant sacrificing a part of herself, if it meant constantly battling the insecurities that his world seemed to amplify. She wondered if their love could truly survive the cracks that had formed between them, or if those cracks would eventually grow too wide to bridge. The breaking point came during a quiet evening at their home. They had been talking about the future, about their plans, their dreams, the life they wanted to build together. It was a conversation they had had many times before, but this time, it felt different. My sister, who had always been so eager to plan their future, seemed hesitant, her words carefully measured. When he asked her what was wrong, she finally let it all out. She told him about the doubts that had been eating away at her, about the pain of feeling like an outsider in his world, about the fear that their relationship had always been imbalanced in ways she hadn't fully understood. To his credit, he listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to defend himself or dismiss her feelings. When she was done, he told her that he understood, that he had seen the changes in her and had known something was wrong. He told her that he loved her more than anything and that he was willing to do whatever it took to make her feel secure in their relationship. But he also admitted that he couldn't change the past, that the choices they had made as teenagers had shaped their relationship in ways neither of them could undo. It was a moment of painful honesty, one that left both of them in tears. They held each other that night, clinging to the love that had brought them together even as they acknowledged the challenges that lay ahead. For my sister, it was a turning point. She realized that while their love was real, it wasn't enough to erase the pain of the past. She needed time and space to figure out what she truly wanted, to decide whether their relationship could survive the weight of everything they had been through. In the end, my sister made the hardest decision of her life. She called off the engagement, not out of anger or resentment, but out of a deep need to find herself again. She told him that she still loved him, but that she needed to learn how to love herself fully before she could commit to spending the rest of her life with someone else. It was a decision that broke both of their hearts, but it was also one that gave her a sense of empowerment she hadn't felt in years. The months that followed were difficult, but they were also transformative. My sister began to rediscover the parts of herself that she had lost along the way. She traveled, took up new hobbies, and deepened her relationships with the people who had always supported her. She found joy in her independence, in the knowledge that she was building a life that was entirely her own. And while the pain of the past still lingered, it no longer defined her. As for her ex-fiancé, he respected her decision, though it was clear that he was devastated. They remained on good terms, and he continued to express his love and support for her, even from a distance. In time, they both found a sense of closure, though the bond they had shared would always hold a special place in their hearts. Looking back, I realized that my sister's journey was never about her relationship with him or the jokes that had been made at her expense. It was about her finding her own worth, about learning that she didn't need anyone else's approval or validation to be whole. And while her path was filled with pain and uncertainty, it ultimately led her to a place of strength and self-acceptance. Today, she is thriving in a way I never could have imagined. She has built a life that reflects who she truly is, a life that is rich in love, purpose, and authenticity. And while the road she traveled was far from easy, it was one that she walked with courage and resilience. In the end, she found herself in that, more than anything, is her greatest victory.